What is up, my dudes? It is PM, and in today's video we will be reading something that is supposed to be a Steam discussion on a potential Basekit protection against gen rushing, but don't worry, it's gonna descend into being an ego fest quite quickly. I mean, it is Dead by Daylight's community, you know. Okay, so the discussion starts with Retro saying killers need Basekit protections against gen rushing. As the title says, it's high time the killers get some Basekit protections against the exploitative nature of survivor main. Since 3 survivors can do a generator in a matter of seconds, while the average chase takes much longer, that's true. I think the game should afford players some protections against this. Okay, then he calls out people who might be thinking that it isn't fair by saying basically that like survivors literally got Basekit per time to counter like killers killing, which is already really strong, so he thinks it wouldn't really be a problem to add something like this, which I kinda agree with. Perks are not the answers and will never be. I do agree with this, because even if you create a fix with a perk, it would mean that first of all you would need to pay the DLC for it to work, and then it would literally just limit the killer's perks, because you would basically play with 3 perks and 1 perk that will literally never move. It's kinda like when Corrupt was meta, you know? The friends I've introduced to Dead by Daylight at the time literally thought Corrupt was Basekit, because they saw it every single killer game, and it just like limited what killers brought. And we're in a game where there's like 300 perks on like 45 different killers, so you would think you would see variety, but you actually do not. Killer needs to be able to breathe in this game, that is true. Killer feels really like you're running against the clock, like literally you do not have time for this. If you just play like literally just chasing survivors as a killer is most often than not a good play, but the game literally tells you to not interact with the other side, which is really weird. Again, you already gave survivors protections against killers rushing their objectives, so he's talking about like not being able to tunnel, which is basically the equivalent. I do agree with him. So it's only fair that you would now do the same for killers when survivors rush their objective. That is true. So I do agree that survivors have a huge time advantage. Even if your chase is really fast, you need to down someone, hook them, and then find someone else. And even if by some miracle you do all of that under a minute, it still gives you like 1 gen being done, and the second one will be done like 30 seconds afterwards. And healing another survivor only takes 16 seconds, which is insanely short, because it invalidates at least like 30 seconds of killer chase, which is insane. Like, survivor time is so much less valuable than killer time, and you still like can invalidate the actions of killers like so quickly. It's insane. In the original post, he says it is unfair that they can do 3 to 5 gens before you down a single survivor, which is a bit of an exaggeration, but I don't think any killer main would disagree with me saying that you usually lose 1 to 2 gens by the time you finish your first chase. It obviously depends on how good a killer you play to. For example, most of my trapper games, I get like 2 gens popped by the time I get my first down. It doesn't mean I lose these games entirely, but at that point you will either need to play perfectly or need to rely on survivor mistakes. And I think people are scared of buffs like these because they would essentially think kill rates would skyrocket. I might even argue they would actually go down for the simple reason of killer's mindset changing. If you have gen rush protection as a killer, you're not salty and you don't have to try hard in order to win a game. Playing killer is like exhausting exactly for this reason. When I finish a killer game, mentally I am cooked, okay? Like, I've played like my life depending on it, and I was like standing straight the entire time, which is something I've never done once in my life for a game of survival. I am like a pure survivor main to even tell you, like I don't even have the achievements to get like iridescent 1 on killer, showing how little I play killer. And as a survivor, I went entire games in chase while being laid back on my chair chilling, which shows like how little stress you're on, okay? Retro said it isn't fair that survivors have absolutely no consequences whatsoever for being unhooked at any point in the game. The killers need protections against survivors gen rushing, and I do agree with him that survivors are absolutely not punished anymore for when they unhook survivors incorrectly. Unhooking used to be a very strategic and important decision. However, nowadays it's more of a mindless task due to just how strong it is to have endurance off the hook. And this makes his arguments just as strong, since survivors consistently get buffed to account for the stronger killer strategies. That's about damn time that the opposite happens. And this is kind of what he says in his third paragraph, basically saying that since survivors get endurance, the survivor role has been getting buffs or getting access to things killers just can't do anything about. And I mean, he's kind of right. Like, what can you do against resilience, finesse, vigil, and made for this? You just have to live with them. However, survivors have always had counters to killer picks and powers, and some might be niche, like sabotaging every hook so you're sure the killer doesn't get any scorch hook, but you can do it. What is a killer going to do about you having made for this? Like, it's going to down you eventually, he's gonna need to hit you. Killer speed perks have counterplay, like if you detect machine learning early on, you can literally just make the perk useless, or stuff like rapid brutality require a first hit and take away bloodlust, which is like unironically the last thing ever given to killers to combat the survivor strategy. But if you just play extremely safe so the killer doesn't get his first hit, you can bypass it. And the speed from rapid brutality actually has a timer, unlike made for this. Anyways, what Opis is saying here is since survivors have access to more counterplay at this time of DBD history, killers need a buff to compensate for these, just like when killers had the old tunneling strategy, which gave birth to the endurance Basekit buff. Lastly, he reminds people that there is precedent for such a huge buff, like through the Basekit endurance, and he warns that if killers are too unhappy and leave the game, no one will be able to play the game at all, which is fair. In general, I think some of the details of his post aren't the best, but I do think that his general message is pretty insightful, and I do agree with this take. The goal of killer is to kill, and many measures were taken to make sure that they didn't do this too quickly. But on the other side, the goal of survivors is to do gens, and nothing prevents them from doing these at all, which is unfair. The best strategy as a killer is just to tunnel someone out, but it doesn't work as well due to endurance, and the best survivor strategy is to gen rush and nothing happens. And if I might add, the only reason tunneling is so prevalent is because of how fast the gens are going by. Like, if all the generators took 15 more seconds, you would, in my opinion, seen an insane drop in tunneling rates across all ranks. Not that I think it's what I need, I'm more of the opinion of reducing hook timers, for example, so that survivors actually have to leave gens earlier. I agree with you, killers need anti-tunnel so survivors can tunnel gens. My proposal is one survivor can only repair up to 33% of a generator before they have to go find another one. I would expand on that, but Retro already did, so let's read it. I wonder how well the idea of survivors being assigned to certain generators would work. Basically, if a gen isn't assigned to you, you can't work on it. If a survivor gets eliminated, then you can work on it. Something needs to be in place to simply prevent survivors from being able to gen brush the gens. So I like that original ideas are being shared, because it's always fun to imagine like drastic changes to a game you love, you know, like imagine Commando getting a buff in Risk of Rain 2, maybe one day. But I'm personally not a huge fan of both ideas. The first one was to limit how far you can progress the gens on your own, so that would mean teamwork would be more important than ever, already making Swifts stronger. But my main problem is that new players would be extremely lost at why they have an arbitral limit on how much they can repair gen, and if one of your teammates doesn't play, you're just doomed. I'm guessing such a system could like evolve with the current amount of players alive, allowing you to do like 50% of the gen when 3 survivors are remaining, 75 and then 100. Although that would make sense, you would probably need 100% available when 2 survivors remain, because usually one gets chased and the other one is trying to gen rush. And the second one, the idea was to assign survivors to a specific gen, which I prefer a bit more, to be honest, but I still find it hard to understand for beginners. And another problem is you rely way too much on your teammate. Once again, the trolls would just solo lose the game, whereas they currently like can hinder the game for you, but not straight up lose you the game. But at least people are trying to think of new game mechanics instead of just saying double the time it takes for gen to be completed, which would be worse than the 2 previously mentioned ideas. I like their originality, I just think trolls and beginners would make this not possible. Yes, quality of life changes for killers and handholding just like they do for survivors. So I don't know if he's being sarcastic or not. If he is, well, yes, exactly. If one side has handholding, why not the other, you know? Finally, we arrive to what I believe is the best idea of this discussion. Basekit Deadlock for 10 to 15 seconds would be a start. And I was already sold on the idea, but then I saw someone else comment this right below. Basekit Deadlock, ladies and gentlemen, survivors have borrowed time, which is insane, so why not? 8 hooks times 15 seconds of borrowed time is 120 seconds of protection. 4 gens being protected for 25 seconds is 125 seconds of protection. It lines up almost perfectly. Yes, survivors rarely get 12 hooked, but they also get the advantage of starting the game by spawning next to generators, and killers have to find them, which takes a bunch of time for most killers without mobility. And I think this idea is genuinely perfect. As I said, this perfectly lines up timer-wise, but it's also both intuitive for new players and so easy to balance. If the 25 seconds is too long and survivors get massacred all of a sudden, reduce it to 15. Problem solved! I think this kinda aligns with a popular wish I saw back in the day, which was to have corrupt intervention be Basekit too. Except Deadlock is better to make Basekit because it's not as oppressive or boring. The only thing I would have to say is they should make it be 15 seconds, and then if you have the perk Deadlock, which obviously would need a rework, but it could either make the blocking of gens last 10 more seconds, or it could block like the second most progressed gen, but for a lesser amount of time, like 10 seconds for example. But overall, I think this is the best idea of this thread, and I would really love to see this happen. Now, do you think people in this thread like this idea? Actually, I don't think anyone mentioned it afterwards. The comment right after this one is this, and this comment I'm not sure if he was answering someone or if he's trolling and low-key schizophrenic, like I have no idea. In his first paragraph he says, killer protection could work to cancel out another player's direct agency, even though that might be skill. And where exactly is the skill in the problematic things in Dead by Daylight? Low-key, like, tunneling was easy, so they made it rough. Infinite were an easy win, so Windows blocks and Bloodlust were added. Sitting down on a gen the entire game is dead easy. It's not cancelling agency if the thing you want to modify literally makes one side wants to shoot themselves with a power 5 flame punch 2 unbreaking 3 mending bow in Minecraft, okay? Like, do you know why killers hate sprint burst and vigil combo, but most, I would say most, because obviously some do complaints about everything, but most killers don't care about Dead Hard, because Dead Hard is probably like one of the most fair perks in the entire game, and I already had this take, but literally 5 seconds ago as of writing, Ots released a weekly compilation calling it Schrodinger's meta perk, and it's not that it can be good or bad as the title or the video might make you think. It's that the keyword of this perk is agency, because you have to play around it as killers, and some developing even specific strats to bait it, like revving the chainsaw and going for a quick M1, or faking a lunge with race by tapping your power, just like waiting for a volt or making an erratic movement all of a sudden and baiting it without even a swing. This is skill with agency. Then he says, that's one crazy notion, but I think I can see it. Maybe some sort of window blockers that stop survivors from being able to juice a loop for too long against the killer who can't figure out how to run it. How about a warning that helps you killers track down the survivor if they hide for too long? Oh wait, is it really going to be handholding? Maybe killers could just go faster the longer the chase takes. Gotta make sure they can catch another player even if they're not good enough to actually do that on their own. These two paragraphs are clearly ironic, but it actually is not ironic because it gives you another kind of hit, which is the moronic. Window blocking was introduced in the game very quickly for a damn reason, which is that they realized that no one could kill in the killing game. Without window blockers, killers would low-key have to disconnect every time they get a map with 2 windows. Like, how does this make any sense? And like, why are we complaining about survivors being so AFK that they get crows? Like, in my 1,500 hours on this game, I've never gotten a crow without being AFK once. And if you do get some as a survivor, the only thing you are actively doing is emptying the entire game for your teammate. And all the survivors should be happy about you being revealed in chase, because it will at least buy them 30 seconds of free time. There really is room to talk about restructuring generators the same way there is room to talk about anti-tunneling systems. Neither ambition is particularly easy, but they're both reasonable attempts to address a core gameplay frustration that leaves matches miserable instead of at least enjoyable. I don't know what the tone of this comment here is, but here actually just nails the problem perfectly and seems even moderate. I think as he admits below, he just doesn't like the repetitive comparison to Basekit board time. I think the comparison makes sense because it was such a huge buff and it did take away skill expression for the survivor role. Although I would never really advocate for its removal, maybe just making the unhooked survivor being ghostly instead, so hits actually phase through them and they can't body block instead would be cool. Then that's actually fine. Anyways, I do agree that the endurance buff was for the better, but I understand why it's used as comparison, because it essentially made tunneling the best killer strategy ever created, a shadow of what it used to be. Retro coming back saying, I played DBD when you could open the hatch with a key and all survivors could escape through it, so yes, I did play during those times, and I know the game is now a hollow shell of what it used to be. I played Survivor when it actually required a plan to safely unhook a survivor that was being camped, and guess what? The game went on for 7 years without Basekit protections, and it continued to grow. No one quit over the game not having those, but people will quit when they realize the killer experience is not worth it because of that. So it's not accounting for window blocking, bloodlust, and crows, because they are more like mechanics that fix a terribly thought out gameplay, but he is correct. I've spent half of my hours in Dead by Daylight that did not have endurance off the hook, and although borrowed time was always like an S tier perk, it was far from being on everyone's loadout or even in every game. I personally like didn't even run it. I ran Unbreakable way more, for example. DS also had probably way more usage in my opinion, which you might think is because you could get tunneled so easily, but even nowadays, like, Decisive Strike is still one of the most used perks of all time. Like, it didn't change anything in that regard. But with old Dead Hard, Unbreakable, Decisive, you really didn't need anything after being unhooked. And unhooking wasn't done so brainlessly as nowadays. And truth be told, nothing stops you from still tunneling even today. Like, outwaiting 15 seconds is a pretty mild punishment. Killers like Bubba can literally just 2-tap you off the hook, or you can just like grab the guy, and it's not an impossible thing to do. However, now that the change is here, I think straight up taking it away would make a lot of newer players confused, and also this is probably really good at low MMR, which is why DBD conversations on balance are so hard, because killers have such a big difference in strengths, and the higher your MMR is, the higher your escape rate is on Survivor. So who are we doing this for? I don't know, it's a real question, like, what are we doing here? I have no idea. Why am I doing this video? Last answering to the last message of Retro we just read says, and more people will join. I've played DBD off and off since 2016, and its entire life people who can't manage anything other than vigorously complain keep stating that the game will die, which has never come to fruition. Current DBD is far better than the original state of the game for its longevity. Even if you don't like some of the changes, nostalgia is a hell of a drug. This guy is really right. Also, I am arguing for a killer buff right now. DBD will probably not die anytime soon, and old DBD was objectively the worst, just behind Goal's release month. But the game not being in the worst state ever right now doesn't mean we can't still talk about the problems, you know? I personally think Killer is in a very bad state. Not the worst it's ever been, like not release day type of bad, but still probably like top 10 worst months type of bad. I don't think any of us can really explain why the game has done so well, but I have no idea. I might need some expert level thinking like odds and JRM on this one, because I genuinely have no idea. But I kinda think this about like half of the games that come out nowadays, so it might just be me. Behavior hasn't been able to replicate the success, and the list of problems you, I, and others have stated should have hurt growth. Would you say that new players should join a game with co-merchant being indefinitely destroyed pending a rework that has vanished from official communications? Probably not. You are not being reasonable about the changes. The only good thing about old DBD was the darker themed maps, infinite one down Morris. Oh my god, I forgot about one down Morris. And all of the other exploits are not something I have any desire to see again. And for real, like, Skirmisher has been dead for so long, and she wasn't even strong before that. She just got nuked due to bad PR basically, which is wild. And I do agree, old DBD was so bad. I had totally forgotten about old Morris, but there also was Moonlight Offering stacking and the thousands of bugs in the game at the time. It wasn't a great time, yeah. Back like my abusive father is Retro. I absolutely am being reasonable. There is nothing fair about the game removing this much agency from the killer role. Basekit protections, gen regression limits, perks that hinder the killer, trapped perks, palette, forever lives, forever chases. All of these things do not but enhance the survivor experience at the expense of the killers. When I played DBD, survivors had to play as a team. They played better because they had to. The game has removed that element and replaced it with coded protections and leverage for their role. Playing survivors now is the most mind-numbing, boring experience ever, while playing killer is the most miserable, stressful, and unrewarding experience ever. I do agree. How a game like this is even marketable is beyond me. My only guess is it's still carried by collabs and characters. Yeah, I still have no idea why the gen kick limit is a thing. I mean, I know why, but it's a dumb reason. Like, one killer is good at holding down gens, so we're nerfing every killer in existence? What? Did Ghoul coming out make every killer get a nerf to their speed? No, so why would you do that? I do agree DBD used to be way more team focused, and that survivors nowadays is pretty boring. And I mean, of course it's getting carried by collabs, obviously. You might have noticed this discussion became more of a what is wrong with DBD conversation. More than once centered around sharing ideas on how to diminish gen rushing. Bringing up crows, a mechanic to stop players from literally holding the game hostage and putting it in the same pool as Basekit protections, BT or window blocks, is insane. It's not a balanced addition, never has, never was meant to be. It's a mechanic to stop people from holding the game hostage. And he's goddamn right, crows or window blocks, to be honest, have nothing in common with Basekit Deadlock. One is to fix a fundamental gameplay flow, and the other is a hotfix based on, like, changing player habits. Okay, so this guy is basically saying crows aren't used to fight AFK people, but just can hinder you in general, and since there's already a 1 hour match limit, crows don't matter? Maybe I don't know what optimal gameplay is, but at the very least I play the game, you know? And honestly, like, the average DBD match takes like, what, 15 minutes? So having to wait 45 more minutes is way too long. You would have the time to do like a full game of League of Legends. This thread is making me realize how much I love crows, man. I think people who think crows are oppressive are doing like a self-report, because they are like advertising that once there's only 2 survivors alive, they just hide and wait for the other one to die and don't do any gens or do like try to take chase. Anyways, this thread really ended up deviating a lot from the original intent of the OP. In general, I believe that Basekit protections cannot be taken away now that they are in the game, and obviously mechanics like crows, bloodlust and window blocking shouldn't either. I'm a huge fan of making Deadlock be Basekit. I think it will really help low tier killers, and making gen pop slower would also improve the killer's morale, meaning less killers would end up slugging or doing hard tunneling. The problem, as always, is that not all killers are created equal. A nurse, Ghoul or Blight with this change could end up being quite oppressive, whereas Trapper or Ghostface will still have to fight a lot. I'm always advocating for nerfs for killers above 8 tier, to be honest, because I think DBD's team cannot create a balanced game when like Momo 7s did like a win streak of 2000 matches on Blights, or Super Half did a win streak of 1160 matches on Nurse, whereas like Trapper's highest win streak is 210. And imagine that any killer above 8 tier just gets their knees broken, and that we give a machine gun to anything below C tier, well, there will still be a huge difference. Why? Add-ons. Add-ons can literally make or break a killer so much that it's actually insane. Without add-ons, Blight is usually said to be the second or third best killer in the game, but there's a reason why his win streak is double that of Nurse. His best add-ons and loadout make him the best killer by far, whereas Nurse's add-ons don't really buffer that much. Even Trapper, that I love mentioning, with his best add-ons, the guy is actually pretty good. The difference between a Wraith with and without add-ons is huge. A Boba with his best add-ons is like so much more impressive than without. And at the other side, we have like killers like Nurse or Nightmare who basically don't change with or without them. But what should be done, then you might be asking me, waiting for me to fix 10 years of DBD problems in a 20-minute video written at 3 in the morning? Well, obviously killers need more consistency. What I mean by that is that it's okay for an F tier killer to become S tier with his best add-ons, as long as the difference between S tier and F tier isn't that of heaven and earth. There would need to be a lot of numerical changes to strong killers, like reducing how fast Blight gets token by like 15%, while also nerfing the add-ons, giving him faster recharge by 15%. And on the other side, you can just buff the lower tier killer through either numerical changes, or better yet, quality of life changes and new mechanics. Anyways, I still think even without changing anything to current Dead by Daylight, having a 10-second Basekit Deadlock, or no holds barred as it's called nowadays, would make lower tier killer appear more often. It would make killers feel like generators don't get done instantly, and then make them way less toxic, while survivors could finally see killers outside of Blight, Ghoul and Nurse. Anyways, that's it for me. If you've enjoyed the video, like and sub. I mean, you've watched it until now, so you've at least enjoyed it as background noise, so come back another time for background noise, I guess.